Good evening from Washington, D.C. I'm Marina Isgro, Associate Curator of Media and Performance Art at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's event with the artist and filmmaker Margaret Salmon and Rosalind Galt, Professor of Film Studies at King's College London. Tonight we'll be screening Margaret's 2007 work, Nina Nana, part of the Hirshhorn's collection, followed by a conversation between Margaret and Rosalind. Before we start, I'd like to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather. For myself in Washington, D.C., the Nacotchtank or Anacostan and Piscataway people, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. This event is part of Viewfinder, Women's Film and Video from the Smithsonian, a year-long virtual screening and conversation series featuring an array of moving image works by women across Smithsonian collections. It is generously sponsored by the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. The first phase of the series focuses on the subject of interiority, understood physically, psychologically, or otherwise. Each virtual program of the series occurs on the first Thursday of every month. The next screening on May 6th will include works by Zora Lathan and Iman Ukta Hameen on the topic of Black interiority. For more information about upcoming events in the series, please visit womenshistory.si.edu. We have live closed captioning available tonight, which can be accessed along the bottom menu. There you can also find the Q&A function, where we invite you to submit questions to be answered during the second half of the event. And now let me welcome Margaret and Rosalind. Please turn on your cameras. Hello, welcome. So I just want to introduce you both briefly. Margaret Salmon was born in New York and makes her home in Glasgow, Scotland. She received the inaugural Max Mara Prize for Women in 2006 and has shown her work in major venues, including the Venice Biennale, Berlin Biennale, and Whitechapel Gallery in London. Salmon's intimate poetic films focus on individuals in ordinary settings, whether documenting the activities of village residents in the Scottish Highlands or following an elderly woman through her daily routine. She turns a sensitive and empathetic eye to the everyday dramas of human experience. Nina Nana, which we'll be viewing tonight, depicts three Italian women tending to their infants to the sounds of a spare lullaby. Scenes of tranquil, tender moments between mother and child combined with shots of more mundane child-rearing tasks, creating a sympathetic portrait of motherhood that acknowledges the breadth of women's experiences. And we're really lucky to have this work in the Hirshhorn's collection. Margaret will be joined in conversation this evening by Rosalind Galt, Professor of Film Studies at King's College London. Rosalind's scholarship focuses on modern and contemporary cinema with an emphasis on transnational film aesthetics and queer and feminist theories. She is the author of Pretty, Film and the Decorative Image, and The New European Cinema, Redrawing the Map. Her most recent book, Queer Cinema in the World, frames queer cinema within a larger network of global politics and cultures. And now, please join us in viewing Nina Nana, followed by a live conversation with Margaret and Rosalind. And I will be back after the conversation to moderate an audience Q&A. Thank you.
So it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Margaret, and to be able to talk about Nina Nana, which is such a beautiful film and just lovely to watch through again. I thought maybe we could just start by talking a little bit about the context in which you made the film and the how it really came to be.
Yes, yeah. So, well, to be brief, it was the result of winning a prize, the Max Mara Prize for Women Artists in association with the Whitechapel Gallery. And yeah, it was, you could say it was like, I don't want to say big break because that's maybe not the right term in the art world, but it was a kind of moment for me where my daughter, I'd finished art school, I'd studied at the Royal College of Art, and I'd graduated. I was pregnant when I graduated, and I had my first child, my daughter, Philomena, and was caring for her when I won the prize. So, you know, I had made some films at RCA and had been in a show called New Contemporaries here in the UK. and then that prize really, winning the prize really, it gave me an opportunity to make something, to sort of stretch my muscles a bit, and creatively, and just funding to stop and work and focus on that. So yeah.
I'm I'm interested in how you approached making a film in Italy, and
Mhm.
you what made you think to work transnationally in that way, and what was your approach to making a film about Italian women and a very different cultural context than the one you were in?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, at the time, in particular, my practice was based upon, I guess, an approach to making, which was very intimate, and reflected a kind of community or a group of people that I knew very well. So I mostly filmed in the hometown where I grew up, in upstate, well, in not upstate New York, in Rockland County, New York. And so I'd made films there. And so the thought of, I didn't consider myself an artist that would take commissions, that would really, sort of, I didn't want to be someone that parachuted in and just kind of
Mhm.
did something and then left. And I felt really uncomfortable with that. So, but I had gone through this experience of having my first child, and all of the ups and downs of that. And I guess for me it seemed, um, we'll talk about this later, but I'd made a film with some singing in it, so I understood. I felt that maybe in Nina Nana Lullaby, which I had spent so much time singing myself in the year before that, was a kind of mechanism or material through which I could sort of connect with other women. Particularly, I was looking at mothers within the first year. So having the children in the film are sort of very young to sort of just a year. And so the idea was to connect through this kind of mutual experience, that we could kind of understand one another in some way, or perhaps I could feel like I had some agency to kind of speak to what they were doing in the film.
Mhm.
So that's how I resolved that. Yeah, it was I learned a lot, and it was a fantastic experience. It's wonderful to see it, and also to say that the Smithsonian put together this screening and transferred didn't retransfer the film, but sort of made a better version of the viewer. So it looks really great. Yeah.
It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And we're watching it in a slightly different form, I guess, than how it would have been seen in a gallery setting,
Mhm.
where it would have been on different walls. Is that right?
Yeah. So I suppose part of I guess I've gotten into this habit with every film project. I try to set up some sort of challenge or some sort of thing, that might not be apparent in the film itself, but maybe something new that I haven't done, or it's a way for me to learn a new technique or to work with a different camera or whatever. And so in this instance, I had never made multi-screen work before. They were always single screen films. So this was the first time I edited and shot and then
Mhm.
installed a work, uh, in that sort of with that intention of making something that you could perhaps, I mean, I would say a single screen work could be sculptural, and atmospheric, and an installation, but certainly this was quite complex to hang and realize. So yeah, it would be quite different. Yeah, but I mean, I think, I don't know how I feel about seeing it as a three-screen viewer, it's a compromise, but it's also maybe something different. There's a value in that too. And I like the idea that people can see the work maybe at home where they're comfortable, and they can get close to the sound and close to the image. So that's a totally different experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and it works really well. I mean, I've not seen it as a multi-channel piece, and I can imagine it would be really beautifully immersive
Mhm,
in that setting.
mhm.
But also watching it this way, you have maybe a slightly different relationship to the 3 images because you can't see them all at once.
Mhm.
And so we're maybe watching a little bit differently when we can compare each image at the same time. I think it works beautifully.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that now might be a good point before we talk in more detail about the aesthetics and the texture of Nina Nana. It would be lovely to look at just a very quick clip reel of some of your other work, because I think that will be really useful and interesting for the audience to get a sense of the range of your work and your aesthetic as a filmmaker. So we have a short clip to look at. And before we start, I'd just like to note that the final clip includes some nudity. So be prepared for that. So yeah, if we could show the clip reel now, that would be super.
Thanks.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. La 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 la. La 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 la. But
The physiological needs.
So is there anything in particular that you want me to get from the butchers and the grocers?
Yes, I need some lamb for shepherd's pie.
Right. And what are you gonna what you're gonna do tonight, or is
No.
it kind of quick and
No, tonight I was thinking of just like I might stop at the Co-op on the way back and just get some bits, because they're gonna have fish and chips and we'll have had a barbecue for lunch. So I was thinking like we could get some.
What am I?
Look at your face, darling. My God, you might starve.
No, that's fine. Okay, so if I just get some minced lamb, like
Yeah.
300 grams.
Yeah, 300 grams minced lamb, 300 grams minced beef. I'll get some sausages because that's what I was thinking of taking to the barbecue.
Okay.
But it might be, don't get any more. They've had a lot of sausages recently.
Yeah, I won't get.
Some eggs, please.
Some eggs and
free
chicken.
range. If they have a chicken, a free range
I think
chicken,
we might well do on a Saturday.
Then,
I suppose it's Saturday afternoon.
yeah, we
so
might.
but,
But if they have got one, that would be a really nice
and if they
thing.
haven't got a chicken, should I get something
Get
else?
2 large chicken breasts, and
Okay.
I'll do a chicken pie, a mushroom pie, and then I think we'll get
Okay.
some fish, and then we'll do some veggie dishes, some vegetarian dishes.
Okay.
I've got those aubergines that need to be eaten up, and I was thinking of doing the moussaka with the lamb.
Tonight?
No.
But another night.
Yeah.
Okay. And from the if I do a trip to the grocers, or should I just leave that today? Or
Just get some. We need some.
Just some
some
general
stuff that we
stuff.
can make
I'll get
at
some
least
fruit.
make the shepherd's pie with some potatoes, carrots, celery,
Yeah.
onion, all
Usual
that
sort
kind of stuff.
So, one of the reasons I wanted us to watch a bit more of your work was to draw out that really lovely relationship between the kind of observational realism that I think we see in all of your films, at the same time as a really carefully constructed um, relationship between sound and image, or between images, that's much more experimental than documentary in tone. And I think we see that across all three of the films that we watched a clip from, as well as in Nina Nana. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you navigate between those two impulses in your filmmaking.
Yeah, that's I suppose I should preface that by saying I can answer that now, but I don't know if I have a complete answer because it's sort of a mystery and it's something that I'm figuring out. And I suppose that's why I'm doing things or doing what I'm doing and why it's so exciting. But I mean, for me, yeah, I think maybe it's slightly schizophrenic in that I have very different different approaches to work. So when I'm filming, I mean, just to give a bit of a background, most of those films I was shooting myself, operating camera. So they were shot on 60mm film. So generally I'd be shooting on a Bolex or a similar kind of camera on 100-foot rolls. And it's a very intense way to work because it's super focused in the moment. You have a limited amount of material to work with. So I'll have a budget and a certain amount of film I can shoot. And then I sort of need to decide how to use that. And a lot of the a lot of the work, I should say that I find, yeah, I'm not a sort of, I'm not a fantasist in that I'm sort of sitting in some studio imagining what's going to happen and building a set and telling people what to say. I'm actually much more excited and interested in seeing what happens when I get there and just reflecting a bit of what's happening already. But the films are not really documentaries in that they don't make any promises that they're truthful, or I'm not necessarily interested in having a kind of a sort of an accurate reflection of what's happening in that space or with those people. I'm more interested in taking those kind of gleanings or those observations, and those observations I think have in them qualities which I can't control. Some of those qualities will be my abilities to operate the camera, to respond, to focus. There'll also be some sort of script that might be somehow sort of, you might even say socially embedded in the choices that I make in the moment. If I go closer, if I pull away, the people that I'm drawn to filming, all of those things are fairly intuitive, though I might have ideas about things in the moment. Often I'm just letting myself follow my instincts. So all of those things are kind of happening, and then also how people are responding to me. And then there's the camera, and then the way in which film registers all of that. So that will be partially how light is reflecting off of surfaces, how color is either, sort of how color is working through the lens, how it's rendered onto the film stock, or black and white, shadow and light. And then I take those materials and then step away from it. So it goes off to a lab and I have some space. I've also recorded sound usually. So I'll be working, then I'll start working on sound, piecing that together. And I come to the work with a fresh, with fresh eyes, really. So then I sit down and I put on my editing hat, and then I make the film from that, really. So it's a really intuitive process. It's fairly risky. I'm not that I apply to that situation and relationships which come out of that. But beyond that, I don't really know always what's going to be. So the editing process is when these kind of formal elements might come in. There might be some self-reflection. There might be humor. There might be kind of rhythms. There might be irony. Might, like in Nina Nana, for instance, there's this idea of the bed. Letto is a word that's often said in the song, and you see beds arrive when someone's singing letto, or there might be some irony, like in, Pyramid, where the couple, I was very close to them. They were in, Ben and Emily were in, worked with me really closely and invited me into their home to kind of film different things that were happening, different events in their lives. And, the idea that they're, you might starve and there's all this food, and, there's a lot of stuff going on in the edit that comes out. Those are choices, so yeah. So there's this collision, and I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I was thinking about something you said earlier, which was speaking about intimacy, and that's something that seems so vivid in Nina Nana, and also you can see in the clips from the other films. They're very different films, and what that kind of intimacy might mean is different, but there is this kind of strong sense of a perhaps a particular relationship that you had to have with the subjects to make the films, but also that the tone and the spectatorial experience in watching the film is one of an intimacy or a proximity, and that seems something really really vibrant in and important to Nina Nana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm really fascinated by this, because in some ways you can kind of talk about intimacy or proximity, and you can think it can be something that's fabricated or heightened through the film apparatus, through music, through voice, through proximity, really. Or you might say there's a kind of optical intimacy, which is like rendered through depth of field, or long lenses, or the close-up, right? So there's all of these devices are sort of like that you can access as a filmmaker and think and use. But then I think there's something else which I don't know. I when I watch other films, there's a filter we have too, where we can, or at least I feel I can see something and I know it's phony or it's faked intimacy. And then sometimes I can feel there's a connection between, the maker and the subject. And that might just be a few seconds, and then it's gone, or it might be something more elaborate. But I mean, I find it fascinating. So I don't know. I mean, part of it is artifice, part of it is the fact that if I have the camera and permission to film from someone who's interested in working with me, they let me become intimate with them to some extent, because the act of filming gives you access to a proximity to someone that you wouldn't normally have, maybe in day-to-day conversation. So, I mean, we kind of talked about this, and I love saying this, but, the idea that, you can come really close to someone with the camera, and make a close-up. But I wouldn't necessarily do that if I was talking to you, over coffee one day or whatever. So all of these social, all of these relationships then become embedded, or all of this access becomes part of the film, the fabric of the film. And I suppose that's what excites me. And that's what I like. And I like the face. I like faces. And, I look at some of those, like certainly Peggy and Nina Nana, I think I was really exploring, there was this sense of also this kind of melodrama, or this kind of, romantic image of a woman in the home, and these sort of portraits of women's faces, and that's something I still, I still want to do that. I still want to make more of that. Yeah.
Exactly that. I love that sense that we can absolutely analyze the formal mechanisms by which you produce something like intimacy, and the close up, the physical proximity of the camera clearly does that. In Nina Nana, we have this really closely mic'd sound, and we were talking before about how I thought that it felt like the spectator was put in the position of the baby, where we're so close to the sound, it puts us in a very intimate position.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's not just that, and maybe it's about a sense that the spectator intuits or understands that you must have had a certain relationship with your subjects in order for those proximities to happen, or in order for them to work the way they do. And so it's not simply a case of the film's form. It's something I picked out a phrase from one of your films that we didn't look at, relational optics. This sense of how does the camera relate to its subjects, and how is the viewer invited to relate to the sounds and images, and that seems really important to your work.
Yes, yeah. And I have had moments where I've filmed people I didn't know, and who I don't know, they just gave something of themselves to the work we did together, and maybe that's partially my invitation was pleasing to them, or somehow they felt they could trust me, or whatever it was. But I definitely felt like I was receiving something through the camera, or acknowledging something that they were presenting to me. And that those are I mean, they're really inspiring moments, like not to sound too kind of corny, but it's part of this kind of there's a social aspect to making films, and there's an opportunity to get to know people, or to connect with them, or to recognize them. And that might just be the details of their face, or a pattern on their clothes, or a gesture. It could be fleeting, but still, to me, I that it's meaningful. Yeah.
And we really see that in Nina Nana, I think. And I don't know if you think that has to do with your own experience of motherhood, and the kind of connections that you were able to forge with the women through that. But you were speaking about gesture, and I feel like that's something we really see in Nina Nana. There's a way in which the women are I don't want to use the word performing because that has a sense of acting or falsity, but there is a way in which they use their bodies and interact with the camera that that I think is very striking in terms of thinking of the relationships that we're being asked to form with them. We're not simply observing them going about the business of motherhood. We certainly see them vacuuming and changing diapers and so on, but they also perform as women in a very striking way.
Yes, yeah, and they were, I mean, I guess yeah, when thinking about casting, I mean, I often, you know, I'm not really knowing exactly what I'm going to what I'm looking for, and they sort of each came, you know, we came into contact in different ways. One was the Francesca, who's the woman on the left, was the teacher of a friend of mine. And then Maria Manuela, who's the woman on the right, I believe I met her in a park in Rome.
How?
And so, and sort of, I don't, you know, we sort of exchanged, you know, and she was lovely. And then Simonetta actually is a very well-known and popular actress in Italy. And I think we got into contact through another friend. So, you know, they were all very, very different, kind of from different places, and the situations and the context of our relationship was different as well. But I think they were all very open and like in giving in terms of their time. I mean, I should say I didn't spend a lot of time with them. You know, they were really condensed sessions. Like maybe I think Maria Manuela was in Mofetta in. I guess that's in Puglia, in the south, and I went down to stay with her, and it was just maybe stayed one night and a day just filming. So it was very intensive, and maybe I had a list of things that I thought obviously we would know was going to happen, because you know, childcare is repetition. You know, it's just like, what's going to happen today? Let me consider that. Baby's going to need to feed, baby's going to poo, baby's. So, you know, I knew what was going to happen. And I guess it was just making sure that I was filming in a way where I was respectful of who they were and what they needed, and really followed their lead, but also was clear about what I was interested in. So yeah, it worked out. But I mean, I guess we could talk about gestures and sort of choreography, you know.
Maybe
and how
we
the
should
women
get the clip in order to do
yes
that.
yeah good
Nice
idea.
point to segue into our clip from Nina Nana.
Great. Yeah, so we've just got a clip of one section. We'll maybe without sound, we'll just talk over it.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so. Because yeah, that question of kind of choreography, I think is really interesting.
Yes, yeah. So Cal, could you play that clip for of Nina Nana, the shorter one?
It's on.
It's on. Oh, great. Okay. Oh, I don't see it.
Huh. I think it's playing. It's playing for me.
Oh.
But obviously you can't talk over it if you can't see it.
No. Oh no, I can't see it. Maybe that's not going to work.
Well, maybe just talking about kind of
well, I could
choreography
talk
and
about,
movement will work anyway.
Yes, yeah. So there was this notion of, you know, I was very, I still am, you know, it's really interesting how the width, there it is. Okay, great. I can see it. Yeah, so I mean, one of the beautiful things about making a multi-screen edit was that, you know, I'm really interested in these kind of layers of narratives. And sometimes in an edit, there will be a kind of almost a secret text or a shadow narrative, you might say, that that I might develop over time, where I'm responding to the sound intuitively, but also sort of meaningfully, or it might be creating kind of a sort of a mirroring or sort of doubling of motions or movements or patterns. And so that was really wonderful in cutting this, to kind of coordinate the movement of the camera, but also the movements of the women. And I'm really struck by there's a kind of a sense of them being static, but then also this kind of extreme alternative of them being quite active and almost agitated. And in some ways, I mean, I should say that I was shooting on Ektachrome film and slide film, reversal film for everything, because at the time I was transferring 16mm stock to SD, and I was really aware that the negative stock was quite grainy, quite became a bit kind of pixelated or just compressed in the transfer, and the reversal stock just held together detail in a nicer way as far as I was concerned. But reversal stock is horrible in low light, and also in sort of high contrast situations, the black just goes dark, usually exposed for the highlight. So what I would do sometimes is I would speed up or slow down the frames per second in order to add a bit more light into my exposure in sort of darker situations. And what that does is then it speeds up the frame rate, that speeds up the motion when you play it back. And so there are sort of sections where they're moving and it's a bit jittery or almost clownish. It's quite fast. And those are those moments where I'd slowed down my frame rate in order to accommodate the light. And then afterwards decided to just leave it instead of sort of rejiggling it in the edit and working with the motion. So yeah, that was just something that came out technically, but then I was sort of thinking about slapstick comedy and sort of early silent films and almost this kind of ridiculousness of, I guess for me at the time, there's also this sense of when you're a parent, you open yourself to being ridiculous in a way that you hadn't before. So it felt like there was something of that as well, or just to kind of accentuate that kind of extreme motion, that busyness that you have. So yeah, I mean, I guess in those clips you could see that there was a sense of like the portrait coming in then, and faces, almost this idea of, I was watching this film, Three Coins in a Fountain, about three different women, and they're sort of, it was a sort of like, I don't know, 50s kind of like women's film, maybe. It's sort of romance, fantasy. And yeah, this notion that there's sort of these women are presented as these kind of romantic icons, or this kind of melodrama in the house, but then sort of undoing that through this other footage and these observations of this, the kind of the everyday that they're in.
I like that you talk both about the kind of political and aesthetic content of representing women, representing motherhood, but in the same breath, you're describing the technical work of filmmaking, and you kind of mentioned earlier the importance of shooting yourself, of being a female filmmaker who is using the camera herself, who's filming herself. How important do you think that is in terms of what it means to be a feminist filmmaker or a female filmmaker?
Wow. I can speak for myself. I mean, I'm open to all kinds of films which highlight like the female condition, or take a sort of confront patriarchal ideology, or I'm all for it. But for myself, I mean, it begins with the camera, to me, and the person who's holding the camera, and I direct through camera. I'm making choices through the camera, through the lens, and I don't think I could work any other way. So in some ways, I'm finding images as I'm looking through the camera, and those images that I'm looking for are very much informed by my experience and my life experience and my gendered experience of the world. and also I think subjects are responding to me. You know, it's hard to sort of separate gender from you know, our everyday socializing with one another. And you know, even if it's just that maybe perhaps certain women feel safer with me, or more comfortable, or more trusting, or whatever that is, or maybe I feel safer with them. You know, I've been in situations where I was a bit worried. You know, I was doing a film where I didn't end up using this, but part of the work on Two, which was a film about working with filming people having sex, committed couples having sex, and thinking about how that might look through my lens, and how I might respond to that, and what we could make together. I also then I took some footage of well, I only did one, but it was a man masturbating, which I didn't use in that film. But I remember at the time feeling really nervous. Like, he was lovely and it was fine, but you know, yeah, I suppose you can't escape these things right now. The way our world is built, gender is still inscribed in certain realities that we have to face, and so that reality is ingrained in the film itself, in the way that I'm making the film, and that begins with the camera. You might say it begins with the opportunities I have to make the film, and the funding that I might get, or the time I might have, which I might not have, you know, because I'm a woman, because I'm a mother. So, you know, that's where we come back to Nina Nana and the Max Mara Prize, and the fact that it was, you know, really created. And I was certainly a model awardee in that, you know, I did need time and money, and someone to say, you know, go off and do the work, where we've got your back, you know. So yeah, it's everywhere. It means everything to me. I can't escape it.
Yeah.
I'd like to not have to make feminist films, you know.
Yes, that is, yeah, I think that we could hope for that there not to be a need for feminist films.
Yes,
And I think you talked a little bit about the kind of gatekeeping quality of very male film production spaces as well. So there's that kind of infrastructural issue as well, right? It's not only at the level of funding and opportunity, it's the next step. When you do have the opportunity, you might encounter situations that would be a lot easier and smoother if you were a man.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's not crazy to imagine having a positive, fun experience while making a film, or you know, doing your work. at least not, you know. So yeah, I think, you know, when I was first starting out, you know, partially my training in photography, and like I have 2 degrees in photography, and I did really learn my craft. I understood, you know, enough, but I was also I mean, I had you know, I was really conscious of the fact that I wanted to be able to do what men did, and I wanted to be able to use cameras, and I'm still like that. You know, I still, like, I'm shooting on 35 now. I've finally bought my own 35mm camera. You know, I want to hold those tools, and I want to see what happens when I use them, and I'd like to see other women using them too, because I imagine what will happen, you know, will be quite wonderful.
Yes. I think that's a wonderful note, perhaps, to end our part of the conversation and move on. I see that we have questions coming in. So why don't we stop there and ask Marina to join us once again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. I could keep talking all night, but
Yeah,
let someone
thank
else
you.
in.
Thank you for that wonderful conversation. That was really great. Just want to say, if you would like to submit a question, please go ahead and hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We have a couple here now that I will read. So Charlotte Ickes says, such a fantastic program so far. Can you discuss how you might treat song, for example, the lullaby or Amazing Grace, in distinction to other types of sound?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a great question. I mean, Amazing Grace was interesting because when I was working with Peggy, I asked her what song she knew, what she'd like to sing. And I think I approached that film thinking about music videos and just wanting to explore what what might happen if I sort of, I mean, it's not a music video, but yeah. And then Nina Nana was a way for me to, because I didn't speak Italian when I went to Italy, and I still don't speak now, unfortunately. I know some words and can order food very well, but you know, I didn't really speak fluently, and so that was music, and the lullaby, the form of the lullaby was a way for me to kind of connect sonically in terms of, and yet linguistically, so to speak, if you think of the lullaby as its own language almost, you know, that's recognizable, like it transforms beyond words. But I would say that I am very intensively involved in my sound mix. So I sometimes work with the sound recordist, sometimes work on my own, or other people on set, you know, involved in the film will make recordings for me. And then for many years, I would edit sound first, and then I would cut image to the sound. So the sound was a score, you know, and maybe it was a diegetic score, or maybe it was a score of field recordings or whatever. It was still to me musical. So so it's all about sort of rhythm and beats, and yeah, when you then bring words into it, I mean, obviously then there's sort of other sort of ways of reading that in terms of language or narrative, and there's dramatic arcs. You can, you know, you can do all kinds of things. So then I start to consider, you know, when I'm editing words, you know, do I you know, there is a sense of not wanting to manipulate those words if they're spoken by someone in a situation and I'm working with them. So I might want to keep those conversations or those statements or expressions as intact as possible, and then edit around that. So there are sort of other ethical strands that come in. But certainly for me, like, I love mixing sound, and I approach it as a score. So I open up the idea of a score so that it encompasses all sorts of possibilities. And that doesn't mean it's a song that's not just about music or a song, but it's about a collection of sounds with different emphasis and different impacts on an audience.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Sophie Knezik is asking, with Nina Nana, most of the film was shot in such strong contrasts of dark and light. What were the implications of this heightened contrast for you, above or within the aesthetic of contrast?
I mean, in it, you know, the Italian, the light was very strong. I was in Italy from sort of, I guess, from spring through to summer. So, you know, it wasn't cloudy so much. It was very strong light. And then that's heightened by the material of the film itself. In particular, the reversal stock is a very high contrast. So there's not a lot of leeway between your highlight and your shadow. But I was shooting with reversal a lot at that point. So it was very much like kind of what I was doing and working with. So I think that it was what it was. I don't know if I would film it the same way or with the same materials, but I think the contrast in some ways was where I was at that time, and maybe it highlighted to some extent, you know, when I had my first daughter, I was thinking about this process of growing into a sort of another there was a sense of shedding your skin, almost like a snake, you know, transforming into this other person you needed to be in order to keep this thing alive, you know, this child alive. And part of that transformation, I suppose there was a big contrast, if you think sort of metaphorically, or you know, about this sort of transition from being not having a child to being a mother. And then there were also this sense of these shutters, you know, like in the beginning of the film, there's bright light, and then the shutters go down, and actually inside, the interiors in Italy are generally quite, especially in summer, you know, they're dark, they're trying to stay cool. There's not a lot of sunlight coming in at certain hours of the day. So there was a sense of a kind of dark, like interior, and that was this sort of space that these women really lived in. And then the windows were sort of portals to, you know, light and maybe exteriority, you know, that, but we didn't really explore that so much. They were really inside the whole time.
Okay, next question here. You mentioned the movie Three Coins in a Fountain, which is more of a romantic film, but would you agree that your work is influenced by Italian neorealism? If so, any particular director or film that influenced you the most?
Oh my God. I mean, well, yeah, it's great you brought that up. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, of course, at the time, you know, I was looking at neorealist films, and I think I watched a bit of, I was looking at Mama Roma. There was also, you know, I mean, I love Pasolini. I love Pierpaolo Pasolini. I mean, he's amazing. And if you think about the films that he made, and the aesthetic qualities, I mean, there's still like there's so much integrity in what he was trying to do with film. And I think that you know, I was certainly aware of his work. I was looking at you know, Rossellini, I was looking at Antonioni, you know, so these were people that were sort of on my radar, but and De Sica, you know, in the sense of like making narratives or thinking about fictional portrayals using people that weren't necessarily trained actors, you know, so this idea of you know, just using what you had, working with people that were just maybe almost, you know, this notion that people are playing themselves, you know, they're playing a version of themselves, but it's still a narrative, it's still fiction. You know, the women in the film were still kind of performing for me, you know, to some extent.
Right.
So yeah, all of those aspects of neorealist kind of the neorealist agenda still are so close to my heart, you know. And I think of like Rossellini's The War Trilogy, and the way of like cobbling together film stock after the war and just making do with what you had. And these kinds of like, I would call that a sort of underground aesthetic, you know, it's about a DIY approach to filmmaking. And you know, to me, that's where it's at. That's really inspiring. And that maybe is also part of me wanting to be autonomous, to be a woman working on my own, doing what I want to do, and being free of the constraints of kind of the more gendered production, you know, hierarchies. Then that was inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, while we're on that topic, we have another comment here from John Winnett, or Winnet. While watching your film, some shots in Fellini's I Vitelloni come to mind. Toward its end, a simulated shot from a train into people's apartments is very moving. Admittedly post-neorealist.
Amazing. Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that film. Yeah, I'd certainly watched. I mean, Fellini to me is on the edge of, you know, he goes in, but his earlier films for me were more sort of, yeah.
Right. Okay, one more question here. This is from Saisha Grayson. She asks, I was struck by the degree to which this vision of motherhood felt somewhat timeless or from an earlier moment. Were you intentionally avoiding very contemporary gadgets to keep the neorealist vibe? Or is this also a glimpse of parenting outside of the US consumerist paradigm, where tons of accoutrements arrive in the house at the same time as the new baby?
Interesting point. I mean, I couldn't, I guess you need a sociologist maybe to speak to that last point about, you know, I guess I could say that, well, one that, you know, so I'm 45. I've sort of walked over the wobbly bridge from analog to digital, you know, kind of every day. And yeah, so in some ways there, you know, was a bit certainly it was pre-smartphones and all of that stuff. So there wasn't so much technology around when I was filming at that point. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't all consuming. But yeah, I think what's interesting, what you're also maybe pointing out, is that this idea of the kind of baby industry, baby product industry, and all of those, you know, like, I don't know, warmers for your wipes and things like that. And yeah, I wasn't really struck so much by that in Italy. You know, it's, and some people might say, you know, on the flip side of that, there also weren't many, you know, baby, you know, changing rooms like in restaurants. You know, there was some, but it was like still, you didn't have so many of those kinds of things either. So it was a different approach to kind of family. Like family was, you know, on the other hand, I could sit in a restaurant and someone would hold my daughter for me, like in the other, you know, the table next to us while we were eating, just because they loved, you know, they wanted to hold a baby. So yeah, I think those things are great. But well, I'm losing track here. But anyway.
No, that was great. I guess the other part of that question was just about is it intentionally timeless? Or is that sort of a product of, you know, of the reality there?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly the Ektachrome, and there are certain images in that where, which look, you know, there's a picture, a shot of Maria Manuela actually, where I think the film is a little bit damaged actually. And it does seem, it has a kind of archival quality, or you know.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think it was intentional in that way. No, I mean, I definitely didn't. I just kind of followed the lead of each mother, and you know, sort of just saw what they were doing, and you know, that's what happened. Yeah.
Great. Well, maybe I can ask you one final question.
Okay.
So I was reading an interview with you recently where you talked about kind of at the time of making Nina Nana, how few role models there were in terms of artist mothers. And you mentioned sort of Mary Kelly as the one notable exception. So I'm curious to hear whether you think the situation has changed at all, or what is your perspective on that now?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, like, at the time when I won the award, they I think the residency was supposed to be at the British Academy in Rome, but there were issues with my my daughter coming with me, and so I ended up actually having to stay at the American Academy, and I had a flat with my partner at the time and my daughter, and so, and there was another residency which I couldn't go on at all because they wouldn't, they couldn't find a solution, and they wouldn't allow children. And then I ended up going to Città dell'Arte, which is the Michelangelo Pistoletto's Foundation up north of Turin. So, you know, I don't know if that happens as much now, or if people are a bit more, you know, might sort of flag that up as being an issue. And not being inclusive. And so the residency issue is still, I think it's still a live one. And I think there are still many places that aren't so receptive to women with children, like, or with child caring needs whilst they're residents. And yeah, I mean, it's really, I'm really hopeful to see different reports coming out and advice to institutions. Maybe in the UK recently, there was one that was sort of advice, a set of propositions, or as I was saying, advice for institutions in terms of working with parents about scheduling meetings around a certain time, or, you know, being aware of school holidays, things like that. So even to have that brought up as a kind of a possibility is encouraging. So I think things are changing, but change is complicated. You know, I don't know. It doesn't always happen very fast. So I think we need to keep pushing, and there's lots more work to be done.
Agreed. Great. Well, I think that's a great place to end then. So I want to just thank you both so much for joining us tonight, and Margaret for allowing us to screen your film. It's really a treat. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been brilliant to see it again, and I'm really happy to be able to share it with everyone. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. So you can, yes.
And thanks to Rosalind too
thank
for
you,
her
Rosalind.
wonderful question.
It was great to have you here, Rosalind. Thank you for your excellent moderation. So I just wanted to say that if you are interested, you can meet us right back here for the next installment of Viewfinder that will be on May 6th.